My name is Andrew Farah. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Density. My talk is called People Are Weird. So I'm going to explain a little bit what we're going to go through today. So first off, the population is growing into a fixed amount of space, like we're not creating more Earth. So the way that we solve that problem is obviously by building in 3 dimensions. This is kind of a staggering number. Now it's 10 billion humans by 2040, but this curve actually shows what would happen in the event of some serious catastrophe. So we're just going to skip that, just sort of look at the general trend is up and to the right. It turns out that you all are very weird. You walk in different directions. You bring stuff with you. Sometimes you even will hide in your natural environment. So these are like beneath hinges. Oftentimes there are packs of people, and you tend to bring plates with you, which is very difficult for us to count. This happens usually very late at night, about 2 o'clock in the morning. People come by and pick up all the stuff that we've left behind. And then sometimes you bring your dogs. Now that's also very challenging because that's an organic object inside of a space where we should be counting a human. Okay, so how we know all of this is that we build a people counter. Density is essentially a space analytics company. We measure how people use space inside of large corporate buildings. So we work with predominantly the Fortune 1000, and we build this device. And so it gets mounted above an entryway. It gets powered with PoE, connected to the internet, and we essentially anonymously count entrances and exits as people go through space. Kind of looks like this. Can support any double or single entryway. There's a lot of complexity inside the device. It looks super simple. I'm not going to sort of go into the engineering behind it. More years of my life have been poured into this than I care to admit. But all of this happens locally. So none of this is streamed to our system. Instead, it's just happening on the device. And we process +1, -1, and all the weird behavior, all the errant behavior that humans exhibit inside of space. Okay, now why this matters is as we've built this, we just wanted to know how busy our favorite coffee shop was when we first started about 4 years ago. It turns out it's a much more interesting problem when you deploy this into really large corporate space, just because the size of the square footage is colossal. So roughly, now I don't know, this is observed behavior, but 40 to 60% of all entrances to secure doors include tailgating. If you're familiar with tailgating, it's just essentially 2 people going into a secure door, and it's typically because someone's being polite. They're just holding the door for another employee. But that's a problem. It's a very serious problem. In fact, it's so much of a problem that they've created these ridiculous products called people eaters. Can you raise your hand if you know what a people eater is? It is not this. This is definitely not, although as much as I would love a giant purple person to come running after the person who tailgates, it is also not this, although we're getting closer. It is not a door. It's actually this. This is a people eater. And this sort of ensures that only one person goes through an entryway at a time. So we know what a man trap is. Okay. This is not a man trap. This is a bear trap. This is also not a man trap. This is a mouse trap. This is a man trap. And these are both very unfortunate names for products, but this is how we solve tailgating today. You'll see these at airports where people will go through, and it can ensure that only one person goes through. So this video actually came from one of our partners who solved tailgating in a slightly different way. They deployed our product on the inside of this door, and as the person goes through, they're using our API to, in real time, 400-second latency, or millisecond latency, very, very quick, count the number of people who go through, and then compare it with the badge data. And if there's a discrepancy, they take a photograph. We don't build the camera, but they set off a process that takes a photograph. I was really hoping there might be a trap door or some other type of interesting thing like a net. So we periodically will do space studies. So we'll take data and we'll help answer, we'll sort of deploy into different rooms, and then we'll analyze the data and we'll provide to a customer what's happening inside your space. And we'll answer questions like, are people using these conference rooms? Is the conference room or space sized properly? And what are the most used rooms or least used rooms? So we were going through this. I've anonymized some of the data, but we were going through this with one of our customers, and we sort of pointed out that one of the rooms that they had was essentially used by 2 people, but it was designed for 12. So the common use was 2 people, and it was a really large space. And they decided that they were going to break it up into essentially a space that was more like a lounge. And we sort of went through each of these rooms, and we landed on one of the last ones. We said, this one's actually optimally used. It was designed for 4 people. It's consistently used by 3 or 4 people, and it's the most popular room. Now, we have no idea why, but it just is. And they said, oh my God, it's the television. And we said, what does that mean? And they said, well, it's the only room that we put a television in. So everyone goes to that room because there's a television there. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should put televisions everywhere. I'm just simply suggesting that once you understand how people use space, you can draw some very interesting conclusions about what to do next. 10.9 billion square feet. That's cumulative leased or owned corporate office space in the US. It is an enormous amount of square feet. And this is just so periodically we'll go to the SEC and we'll scrape the 10K filings just to like pull interesting data. And one of the things that we found was that these companies own just an incredible amount of space, and they are constantly recalibrating. They're either constantly acquiring or they're consolidating. This is just a snapshot of the numbers. Obviously we can see Amazon is pretty high up there. Now, you'd think with this problem of human population rapidly growing and our willingness to sort of solve the problem in 3 dimensions that we'd be constantly trying to catch up with the population, but that's actually not true. So 41% of all leased or owned corporate office space in the US is empty but paid for. It's not just like, it's not just lightly used. I mean, it's not used. It's just empty. And the problem isn't that people don't know they have a problem. They know they have the problem. They just can't agree on which 41%. And so it's one of the reasons we get a call periodically. The cost is roughly $150 billion in the US spent on space that's not used. And what's really cool actually about this is that the percentages are pretty consistent internationally. So 41%, 39%, 40%, it's pretty consistent, although China is more like 28%. I'm not exactly sure how they did that. Japan is like 49% or something. It's really amazing. Does anyone know what COPPA is? C-O-P-P-A. Right, it is a federal legislation that came about, I think, in 1998, and it has to do with child online privacy protection. And they've been updating this periodically. They updated it in 2013. They updated it in 2017. Sort of as the technology has changed, they've made changes to the rules. So you may not be familiar with COPPA, but you may be familiar with like how YouTube requires you to be a certain age or certain systems require you to be a certain age. This is why. And I'm bringing this up for a particular reason. COPPA has never encountered smart cameras before. And when you encounter when you sort of mash up smart cameras and the requirement to have parental consent on any data that you're collecting about someone who's below 13, then you run into some pretty interesting issues. So as you think about sort of your space, public spaces are perfectly okay with cameras, but you should sort of be mindful as you're deploying cameras inside of spaces. I don't believe that most of you are employing 12-year-olds, but just something to bear in mind. Okay, so we did a deployment inside of a large corporate it was a financial institution, and it was the head of global IT who was our primary point of contact. And he had a bunch of engineers that were milling about, and this is a couple years ago, and we had deployed one of our devices, which was about 4 times the size of the device that I had here. It was a prototype, and we were collecting data, trying to understand how the space was being used, and also just trying to improve accuracy. And the head of IT looks at the engineer and says, hey, that thing you're looking at, it's a camera and it's spying on you. And he was joking. And this is what the engineer did. Now what's very interesting about this is that this is culture. This is not rules. This is not policy. This is not your employment contract. This is what people feel. And what was really funny was, so he turns around because we were laughing. We're about 10 feet behind. We were on our laptops and we were like, oh, hey, we started laughing. We said, come on over. We want to show you what you look like on the device. So he came over and we showed him the algorithm. We showed him the depth data. This is all depth data. And he started laughing. He was like, man, that's so cool. Like, you have no idea who I am. I can literally stare up at it and you have no idea. So anyway, just sort of another point is you really can't put cameras in conference rooms. You really have to be able to protect privacy, especially inside of secure facilities. And so building something anonymous was very important to us, and it's very important to the Fortune 1000s that we work with. Okay, one last story, and then I'll wrap up. So we're in all US cafeterias. Culinary has sort of been an interesting space. So we work with heads of global real estate who are trying to consolidate. We work with facilities managers who are trying to automate cleaning of rooms. So it turns out that we clean rooms that are clean as opposed to cleaning rooms that have been used. So we help automate some of that. We also work with heads of workplace strategy who are trying to understand how to optimize space or better improve the space design or the furniture that goes into that. And we also work with culinary, which was surprising to us. So we got deployed into this very large floor. There were 5 entrances to one cafeteria. And we started counting over a period of time the number of people that go through each of the points of entry, and we reconciled the count for that one space. And when we looked at the data, we showed up to a meeting and we presented to the client the data. They had 91,000 entrances and exits through one door, one of these 5 doors, over a 120-day period. The next door over had 131,000 entrances and exits over the same 120-day period. And then 2, not 1, but 2 doors to the elevators had 515,000 entrances and exits over the same 120-day period. They employ 5,000 people. Like, it's one floor, it's 5 doors. And we told them this and they said, "You're lying." And we said, "We're not lying, it's 96.78% accurate," or whatever it was at the time. And we started going back and forth. They immediately deployed us sort of nationally, which was cool. But the thing that I thought was really neat was one guy spoke up and said, "Oh my God, I think that's why our hinges are failing. The doors just kept getting opened and closed and opened and closed." So the point is, your space is big, people are weird, and it's totally normal to not know what's happening inside that space. And I think if there's sort of anything that I would leave everyone here with, it's just simply that as you're thinking about space, like, why build any space without knowing how it gets used? Thank you very much.